Welcome to Closer to Venus. My name is Johnny Burke. Today's guest is Janet Tarantino. She's a multiple near-death experience survivor, host of the Janet Tarantino YouTube channel, Everything Spiritual, and author of Dying to See. Today, we will be talking about revelations about God, Jesus, our pathways, and the nature of the soul. Janet, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is my favorite topic.
And you have quite a few experiences. It seems like they did start at a very early age. How old were you when you saw the pages of your own book of life?
I was pre-kindergarten because I was waiting for everybody to come home from school and I was bored. So I was listening to my mom. She was on the phone having a conversation with a friend and they were talking about adoption. Somebody must have been considering it. And after she hung up the phone, I went out and asked her if I was adopted. As a young child, you often have not lost your connection to where you came from. So I didn't feel totally a part of this family yet. So I asked her if I was adopted. And she said, "No, silly, you're our little girl." So I took that as my answer. But then the next thing out of my mouth, I'll never forget, because I said, "Okay, but I'm going to die young." And when I said that, I didn't have any concept at 4 what age meant. I remember seeing visions go by in front of me, whether it was my mind or actually going in front of me. They were real to me. And it was of me at 3 different ages. What I was seeing was the 3 near-death experiences that I was going to have in the future, which indicates that certain moments of our life are pre-planned for learning experiences. And those pre-planned moments that are for learning will happen no matter what direction or pathway we take. But our choices create a whole new outlook and path for our life. So they might manifest more difficult on one pathway versus another one. So it's best to learn to listen to our inner voices, our inner guidance system, to learn to make the right choices in life so that we have the best experience and most positive experiences throughout our life.
Now, you've had 3 near-death experiences, but what you just said indicates that you had visions of what they were going to be like in the future.
I only had visions of the ages,
right? Of the
not
ages.
what they were going to be like.
Okay, because the reason I ask is that often when near-death experiences happen at a young age, sometimes the experiencer doesn't really make a connection until they're much older. But in this case, it's almost like in reverse. You know when they're coming down the pike, in other words.
I didn't know what these were at 4. I just knew what I was seeing, and I just forgot about it.
Right. Okay. So for the first one, this is one of my favorites. Did you discover who the music box lady was?
Yes, I did. Many, many years later. During that experience, I thought of her as the music box lady because of the beautiful music that she came riding in on, which obviously was the music of heaven because it sounded like angels singing. I also thought of her as Daddy's little girl. During that time frame, as the near-death experience was playing out, she moved up and away for a short period of time. And when she left the tunnel that I was looking through, I thought Daddy was putting her up on a pedestal. Many years later, I drew a picture of everything that I saw and experienced. These experiences, the 3 near-death experiences, I drew pictures and they're in my book. After I had drawn the picture of what I had seen in the 2 tunnels that appeared in the first near-death experience, because one opened up to another dimension. And then there in that dimension was a sumo wrestler that watched me. All he did was watch me. In the other hole that opened up, tunnel, was where the music box lady came in. But they were facing each other and they were communicating, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. I was not supposed to remember it, although I must have known on some level who they were, because that's why I thought of her as Daddy's little girl, because that was my daughter who was not going to be conceived or born until 15 years later. I did not discover who she was until she had grown up and gone to college, and a friend of hers had done a makeup session and they were doing fashion pictures. And after she showed me the pictures, but she was in a position that was quite familiar, similar to the music box lady, the picture I drew. It was unquestionably the same person that I saw in the near-death experience. So we choose people in our lifetime, other souls to work with or play certain positions of our life. So I had agreed to be her mother, and she had come to remind my guide was the sumo wrestler, and that if she wasn't going to be born if I died that night. So they wanted me to get back in my body and continue living. That's the reason she came into that near-death experience.
The music that you mentioned, I don't think there's any way to describe it, but I'm going to ask you to do that anyway. Is there anything even like that here on Earth that reminds you of the music that you heard during this experience?
There are some on YouTube of the angels singing. Actually, it's quite similar to, I don't know if you've seen the movie about the 4-year-old that had a near-death experience, Heaven is for Real.
I've heard of it.
During the rendition in the movie of that, it was quite similar to what they portrayed.
During these experiences, it seems like a lot of these revisions of the future, and you also mentioned what I believe are called soul contracts. Basically, you get into that in-between space, in between incarnations, and you make agreements. I'm going to be your mom, I'm going to be your daughter, and so on. It's really, really incredible. Tell us about the other two. I know that there is one, I believe it was your second NDE, which involved a car accident. And
Yes.
You thought it was a supernatural force that actually saved you during the accident.
Yes, it was. It was amazing how it all played out because my parents had offered to take the kids for a month. So this, in essence, was the creator's way of protecting them for what was going to happen to me. That kept them out of the car that day. On my way home, there was a big dip in the road. At the bottom of the hill, there was virtually no traffic in the area going in either direction at the time, except I noticed I was catching up to a car in the middle lane. So I stopped behind the car and I noticed the traffic light at the top of the hill had changed, and all this traffic that had been in the distance was now, all 3 lanes were filled, and there was the car behind me. And I noticed he was looking to the right. And I knew as fast as they were coming and they didn't see that we were stopped, that they were going to hit us. And in my mind, I called out, "Oh God, he's going to hit us." That's when I heard a voice, and the voice gave me directions of what to do. And I did what I was told. When the pickup truck slammed into the back of my car, it annihilated the entire back of my car. It felt to me like just somebody bumping the side of the bed. And I thought, oh, that wasn't so bad. And I had laid down across the seat and covered my face like I was told. And so I started to take a look. And that's when I noticed the window shattering in slow motion above me. Then that collision pushed me into the car in front of me. And then I was going to be propelled forward. But instead of being propelled forward, I felt a big arm come under my knees and another big arm come under my shoulders. I was being picked up like a child, being carried to bed. Then I was looking down from another dimension onto the scene. After all this was over with, I was suddenly snapped back into my body, and I was in the front seat where I had laid down. But I thought I had not moved, but it was not my window above me shattered. It instead was the rear window. So I had been thrown into the back seat because the seats were laid down. I had been thrown around the car and placed right back into the initial position that I was in, only my legs were over the steering wheel instead of under the steering wheel. I have no doubt that more than one angelic being was there helping me that day, because I should have been a fatality that day. No doubt about it.
I believe it was during the third near-death experience. You write, God embraced you and showed you many moving moments of your life. As I told you, these moments matter, understand them. It would appear that some of these visions were the future, but the question that always comes up here, I think, is how did that happen? But also, what is God? Is it a person? Is it a force? What is it? Does it have an identity?
God is everything and can be anything. He is, in that experience, he came forward as a light coming through the darkness. The first light that came in was Jesus. And the second light that came in was an energetic, living life force. He was alive, or it was alive. I only refer to him as he because I grew up Christian, but God is not a he or a she. He is genderless, yet can take any form that he wants. But he is also the fabric of the universe. We are in God and we can see God because he can be everything. There was one point during another experience that I was in outer space looking down on the world with him because I was up there with other souls. And we turned around and looked at the earth, and the earth was the size of a basketball and was gorgeous. And I said, "What is it all about?" And he raised his right hand in a palm up gesture and said, "Behold." And streaks of light went from over my head in every direction. I said, "I understand, it's math." He is the quantum theory. He deals with energy and matter. One of his breaths can create an entire world or whatever he wants to with the attentions that he has. He is the very fabric of everything.
Now that we're talking about God, another subject that's going to come up is Jesus. Revelations about God and Jesus. So what are the differences and what are your experiences with Jesus? Communication, messages, whether it's telepathic or however that might be.
It's telepathic. He was there too. It's even in the Bible. It says he has created other leaders, other forces, but people always use their limited mind to understand. But I believe that it's a higher force because I think this includes all religions, no religions, whatever your thoughts are, he will encompass it. If he wants to come to you as a woman, he'll come to you as a woman. He knows what you want. So we are all welcome in heaven, not just Christians. Even people without a faith are welcome in heaven.
I have also been told by experiencers that Jesus does come to them in a form that is best suited to what Jesus wants to accomplish. This woman, her name's Patty Lennon, she said the first time she saw Jesus, he appeared to her as a 20-something, slim, almost like a hipster. And she mentioned he even had Tevas on. And I immediately thought of some kid on his way to like a Pearl Jam concert or something, and that he was snarky and had a sense of humor. So it's not the first time I've heard that. So have you had experiences where Jesus actually showed himself to you, or was it more like a dream or some kind of a vision?
Well, in the near-death experience, I saw him. He presented himself in the Christian fashion with the gown and with the open gestures. And he actually looked like the same Jesus that was in the Heaven is for Real movie. Only he came to me with no beard, and because I like clean-shaven man. So when I came to revelations about these things, I felt him touch my shoulder and stand beside me, only he was in a vision form, I believe. He looked real to me, but I'm sure he wasn't standing there. Or he would appear before me with his arms crossed and nodding his head in front of me each time that I understood what a moment was, because it's not easy to understand the moments of your life. And that's what I was told to do, understand these moments.
Here's another question that's always going to come up no matter what. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's going to be any concrete evidence, but how do you know it's Jesus? And I would ask the same question to anyone who talks about any ascended master. How do you know it's St. Francis or St. Bridget or Yogananda? How do you know?
Well, I grew up Christian, so that's the way it was always portrayed for me. And so he came in a way that I would understand. And I had an instant knowing because our energy that cycled between us was pure love. And I knew he knew everything about me. He loved me irregardless of my faults and my weaknesses. And I was filled with love for him too. So I knew inwardly in my entire being that was him.
Mm-hmm. It's a gut feeling then, mm-hmm. In other words. Okay. Another quote I really like, and I think this does tie into that in-between space. No matter what road we take, certain moments are planned, educational moments that will occur no matter which pathway we take, which does, I think, connect to the soul agreements, the soul contracts that you make. So when did you come to that realization that there are agreements and no matter which path, certain moments are planned and you can't really Can't really go around them.
After I laid out my life to understand these moments, then I wrote down all these moments that stuck out in my mind, which was when I was pre-kindergarten age, and then the music box lady, the car accident. In the third near-death experience, what I was shown was an image of my son. And I knew just from seeing his picture that something was going to happen to him in the future. And if I wasn't there, his life would go down a darker pathway, or a pathway that would not be as good for him. So I chose to stay to help him through that difficult time, which was obviously a soul agreement that we had to be his mother and support him through this time. It was a difficult time for him, but when it did happen, we were having a conversation in the hallway. I asked him about a class that he was supposed to be going to. So I asked him, I noticed you haven't gone to your classes lately. What's going on? And he said, I just don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. Well, I was shown his picture just as I was going to go into the light of the tunnel. When he said that, I said, you won't get to where you need to be unless you do what you're supposed to do, and then you'll get there. Now, I wasn't saying he wasn't going to get to heaven. I was saying he would not get his tasks accomplished and get this stuff behind him until he started to do what he was supposed to do. And from that moment on, I saw the light go on over his head, and that sentence connected. So our words carry energy and meaning. If I was not there to say that sentence, his life would have gone down a darker pathway. That was another soul contract. And then another one was Bob, the love of my life, who I remember from a previous lifetime. When I was pulled up to heaven for a lesson review, they made it known that they brought him into my life from the other side of the world for a specific lesson for both of us. That was pretty amazing how that played out too.
So that is the Council of Elders,
yes,
which a lot of us have heard about and sometimes from direct experiencers. What does it look like when you're there in that chamber? I believe you called it a veiled lesson review. That sounds like the council, is it not?
Yes.
Okay.
I drew pictures of that too, of the spiritual beings that were there. Some were sitting at a table and some were standing. It was hard to see their faces, but they glowed, and it was kind of in a white cloudy area. Yet not. It's hard to explain. When they asked me, this was a lesson on judgment. They knew I had already learned. And they said, how did you learn? When I explained to them how I formed a judgment and then how I learned I had misjudged, then my memories played out against the heavens for them. So even though I was standing in the middle of the room, these memories were giants. I didn't even come up to the person's knee as it was playing out around me. I realized that I had misjudged a number of people in my lifetime.
It was like watching a movie on a giant screen.
I was showing them in movie form how I had formed a misjudgment. I had made my own assumptions of things that I took to be true, which were false. Then I showed why I had learned I had misjudged. So oftentimes we take on what other people say without even doing our own check on it. Let's take my neighbor, for example. I didn't like him because he didn't wear the same clothes as my dad. That's how silly these things are. But you can carry these forward into your whole life.
Anyone else that you recognize from a past life that's in your current life today?
No, Bob was the only one from a past life.
Bob was the only one. All right. Now, you mentioned your dad. This is a pretty heavy subject, but you filmed him during his last moments, and you captured his spirit leaving his body. Right. This is actually on your website. How did that unfold where you were in a position to capture that moment?
Okay. This is another part of a soul contract. It's not in my book, but I had a strong calling to take care of my parents during their final years. So I had a family member take care of my home, and I went to live with them. Because of my near-death experiences, they believed me. And I said, would you please share with me everything you experience up until your dying moments so I can share it with the world if it's helpful? And they said, yes. So as they progressed toward their final breath, they shared with me everything that they saw, sensed, felt, experienced in any way. My dad is a man of his word, and they even signed an agreement with me because I was their caregiver and I needed protection for sharing their experiences as well, that I had permission. I had left for a vacation I got a call that his death was imminent. So I rushed home. Everything worked out perfectly for me to be there. I was able to be with him the last 7 hours of his life. He seemed to be resting peacefully. And I woke up 1:30 in the morning. All the windows were closed. No lights were on in my dad's room. I had a sense that I should be filming. And so I took my camera out and then I started filming because I was trying to count the time between his breaths. They were getting kind of erratic. And on the last time I filmed, he exhaled his last breath. And that's when you see it whip out of his body. It's a light blue energetic force that seemed to be moving to the right, which would have been away from my mom. They asked for one thing. They wanted to always see each other. So my mom was laying in her bed because she was dying at the same time. And so we faced it. So if he raised his head, he could see her. He was actually moving away from mom, which didn't make sense to me. But then I asked my boyfriend to slow the tape down. I wanted to get a closer look. It changed direction. You know how a tire can spin so fast, it seems to change directions. He had whipped out of his body so fast, it seemed to be going in one direction to the right. But when you slow it down, you see the real direction he was going, and it was to the left toward my mom, who was dying in the other room. And the last person she saw 9 days later was my dad, who had come there because they had always said they'd walk into heaven hand in hand.
And this is on tape, not tape, but
it's on film.
It's recorded.
Initially, I didn't see it because I was so focused on his breathing. It was my sister that pointed out. She says, "No, there, look at that." And that's when we could see it.
It sounds like your mom had a deathbed vision of him coming back 9 days later.
Yes, she saw many people before she passed, but the more prominent people in her life, like her sisters or brothers and my dead brother, her son, and my dad were the last two that she saw.
I know it's a very heavy experience, obviously, but to hear about the deathbed visions, there's probably as many documented cases as there are with near-death experiences. I think it does make us feel a little bit better. The message is, with a lot of these topics, is that we don't really die anyway. Our physical bodies do, but we keep going. So with these experiences that you've had, how do they compare with traditional views of Christianity and spirituality?
Actually, they connect very well with a wide open mind. If the problem is with the religious faction, they think with their limited mind versus an open one. So they need to think much, much higher and outside of the box than they do. A lot of what I saw the silver cord. That's in Ecclesiastics of the Bible. I also saw Jesus who was there, God who came with clouds. It even refers to, in the New Testament, they talk about one person being another person before.
There are references to reincarnation, even though one of the emperors ordered a council to just erase or expunge any mention of it. So
even the afterlife. When I was taking care of my mom and dad, their pastor came over and they were Lutheran. So I asked him out of curiosity, I said, "What do you tell people that, their husband dies and they say they have a sense that he's around?" And he said, "I pat them on the shoulder and tell them that, well, that's nice." But he said, "We don't believe that." I said, "You preach eternal life, but you don't believe that they're still there?" It didn't make sense to me.
It's kind of silly, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I think one of the greatest things about interviewing intuitives is that I think a lot of us can learn a lot more from intuitives than they can from a document, a book that's been edited and bastardized and taken out of context. So that's really interesting. So the last thing I want to mention here, and I think this is a message many people want to take away from this, is the main message I was given to bring back while I re-entered my body is love is the only thing that matters.
Right. When that happened, that was when I saw my son Kurt's picture. And that's when I told Jesus I wasn't ready to go yet. And that's when I turned back into, because I had changed my forms 3 different times during that experience. I left my body as a blue spirit energy. Then I transformed into an orb or ball of light. They came as ball of lights. the spirits in my first near-death experience left as ball of lights. So everybody coming and going was balls of lights. And then I also changed into a translucent form of myself when the angels came in to show me what would happen in the future if I died. When I made the decision to stay, I turned back into the blue spirit energy. I sat my butt down in Jan's butt. I slipped a spirit foot into each one of her spirit feet. I grabbed my spirit knees and I rocked back and forth in her body until its consciousness could get up enough energy to lay back down into the body and help her sit up and gasp for air. So during that time of re-entering, I kept hearing the message, love is the only thing that matters. Love is the only thing that matters.
Who is Jan?
Jan is me before these experiences. That was the body. The body I refer to Jan. But the real us is the consciousness, because it's the consciousness that lives inside this body that gives this body the energy to move forward in life. And once the body fails to function or dies, that energy whips out of the body, just like my dad did. So it's your spirit that's talking to me, and it's my spirit that's sharing my story of living this lifetime.
That reminds me of another intuitive who had a near-death experience when she was 3. She fell into a tank of water that was used to wash clothes. I believe this is in Colombia. And during that experience, it was incredible because the tank was very dark, but she remembers at one point when she entered that state of ultimate peace, the tank was illuminated from below and she could actually see her body, but she said, that's my body, but that's not me. And I think that's pretty much what you're talking about right here.
That's exactly it. Yeah. I saw my body too, and I zoomed in to look at it from different directions at one point. And so, yes, we continue to hold our memories and our thoughts of who we were during this lifetime, but it's the energetic force, the spirit, that retains the memories, not the body.
That last statement, love is the only thing that matters, reminds me of another episode, I believe it's number 57, Gates McKibben, who's actually been on Regina Meredith's show on Gaia called Open Minds. Wonderful woman. Her episode is called Love is the Only Reality, which sounds exactly what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. I don't think I can do much better than that, so I'm going to end on that note while I'm ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
So Janet, thanks very much for coming on to Closer to Venus. How can our listeners learn more about you online?
My website, janettarantino.com. To find my book, Google my name into Barnes & Noble or Amazon, Janet Tarantino, and that'll pull it up very quickly.
Okay, I will put your link in the show notes and transcript as well. You've been listening to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. You can also leave us a review on iTunes as well. For more info, go to closertovenus.com. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.